teachers who leverage creative work in their class not only see better outcomes from a learning perspective, but they also feel better well-being among themselves and their students, and they feel less stress and less burnout.
Hey everyone, my name's Kyle Wallgren, and yes, this is another episode of the Business of Education. Today our guest is Jesse Lubinsky. He's a powerhouse in the education technology industry. He is an education evangelist at Adobe, co-founder of Ready Learner One. I love that name. He brings over 20 years of experience as a teacher, tech leader, and school admin. Jesse is all about using cool tools like augmented reality, virtual reality, and gaming to make learning more exciting. He is also an author, something that I'd love to do, and has worked with many Fortune 500 companies. He's been recognized worldwide from EdTech's Dean top EdTech leaders. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Hey, Jesse, I appreciate this. You've probably heard this before. Totally trying to geek out right now and learn more about the EdTech space. I never would have thought that I was going to be in education. I never thought I was going to be in EdTech. I don't have a background in coding or anything like that, but I've been an entrepreneur by accident since I was 23 years old. And
it's the best way to do it.
Yeah, it was 100% by accident. I thought I was going to be a professional bull rider at that age. So happens I wasn't that good. I stumbled into working for myself. And then one winter I worked for somebody else and realized working for myself was harder, but it was better not taking orders. So here I am, I don't know how many years later, I don't want to figure it out, but a lot. And now I'm in education. I'm here because my kids, I'm a father first, and I've got 4 children, and I wanted to make sure that they had the tools and resources during COVID that I didn't feel like existed. And I wanted to make sure that parents that couldn't afford these things had access to them. So that's my story, but we're here to hear your story. What sparked you in your passion for education? What got you heading this way?
So it's funny, listening to your story, there's a lot of analogies. I guess when I was younger, EdTech wasn't really a thing, right? I mean, when I was in high school, the internet was just coming on the scene. I mean, we were still dealing with like Telnet and like actual typing into prompts using Unix. So it wasn't really like the fully developed World Wide Web. That was more for me when I was in college. And when I came out of college, I actually had a degree in computer science and I went into the tech space. So I was a consultant for Fortune 500 companies. I worked for, IBM, Microsoft, JP Morgan Chase, back when it was still just JP Morgan, and had a chance to work in industry in the tech space. And I kind of felt like my work was, while I was doing the thing that I loved, I was always passionate about technology. I felt like everything I was done was being kind of undone and redone a year later. I wasn't really making my mark or making a difference. And at that point in time happened to be when the tech bubble burst back in like 2000. And, being young, and I'm sure, Kyle, you could relate to this. Like when you're young, you make decisions that later you're like, I probably wouldn't have done that if I would have. And so like I was getting job offers that were like higher level. They were manager level positions, but they were for less money than I was making as a consultant. And, the young dude in me was just like, I had heard about this New York City Teaching Fellows program. I had always been interested in teaching. And I was like, I could go do this program for a couple of years, get my master's degree for free. And then when I come back out, I'll still have all my tech skills. I'll be a teacher, I'll have that master's degree, and I could do a bunch of cool things with it. And life doesn't always kind of go the way you think it's going to go. So I did that.
Like
I taught, I got into the classroom, was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done. Being in front of 30 kids with the door closed and just like, you're on, right? Like I had done stand up, but this was like in some ways harder because, you're full, just everything is on you. And I loved it. I mean, I really did. I loved everything about, the relationships with kids, making a difference. But there was always still that tech itch. Like even when I was teaching in New York City, the school that I taught at didn't even have a tech program. So I brought a tech program in taught technology to my students alongside teaching math, which is what they had wanted me to teach. Even though I was like the worst math student ever. So like, irony that the subject I was the worst in became the subject that I became a teacher in. But I just kind of stuck with the education thing. I switched schools. I kept teaching. I was teaching middle school and high school math and technology. I was teaching, you mentioned coding before. I was teaching advanced placement computer programming. And I was loving it, and sometimes your skills kind of follow you even when you don't. Like, I would have been perfectly happy being in a classroom for 30 years. And it just so happened my district really needed someone to kind of step up and take a leadership role in the technology space. And because I had the expertise and I was already kind of in the classroom and I really had a passion for it, I took that on top of my teaching for a few years before becoming a full-time technology director. And I did that for like another decade.
So implementing technology and buy into technology, you were in the forefront of that. You got to see that from the ground up.
And I think you might be seeing as an outsider. I think what's interesting to people who aren't in education is like when you come from the business space and then you go into education, one of the most shocking things is just how slow change is in schools. And, there could be a new, really innovative, cool technology that's really buzzy, but there are so many hurdles to adoption for schools. You have your early adopters, and those are the people you start to lean on. And then gradually your role becomes, how do I accelerate adoption of technology? And actually that kind of leads me to like where I went next. So I was seeing all these amazing technologies out there that could benefit kids. And I was thinking about my own kids, as you talked about before. I have 3. And I was like, what a shame it's going to be if they go through school and they don't have access to these amazing tools that are out there. The technology is there. It's just, how do we improve adoption timelines for it? And so that actually became the impetus for creating Ready Learner One, which became the company I left public education to co-found with a couple of other educators. It was really, how do we improve adoption timelines around emerging tech? How do we get these things in the hands of students faster? How do we get teachers more excited about technology and make them feel more comfortable in using it?
So that's exactly where we're at in our journey. Is we've believe it or not, our first client in the education space is New York City Department of Education.
I work with them every day. I love those guys. And I'm a product of the New York City public school system and
Awesome.
Started my teaching career there. So I have a deep love for my home school.
Deep understanding of how slow they move to, I'm sure, and how complicated they make things that don't necessarily need to be complicated.
And by the way, I'm glad that you started with an easy client. You went with the easiest school district to work with. The New York City Department of Education, which has like 40-something discrete districts within it. Fun times in New York City.
But it's been, the thing that's so rewarding about it is that you have, I'll give you a theory of mine, okay? The thing about New York City is it's the #1 location in the country for immigrants to come to. Mm-hmm. And we are a hard thing to chew on. Like, reading and literacy tools are, literacy as a whole, when you can't read, it's not something you're jumping up and down to go do after school. You know what I mean? It's a hard thing, and people try and run away from it. But what's inspiring about this is people that have left other countries to come here are willing to try just a little bit harder than, people that have been born in America and have been here this whole time, right? So the nice thing about New York City is that those first generation immigrant children are willing to try when it's not so easy, and that inspires the kids around them.
And I'm going to say 2 things around that. The first is, I work with, currently in my role at Adobe, I'm responsible for working with New York City as well as districts all up and down the East Coast, kind of inland into Indiana. Mm-hmm. New York City teachers slay. Like, I mean, New York City gets like busted on a lot for the education, and I have to tell you, teachers are crushing it. The work that I see,
not the teachers.
The work that I see teachers doing with students is not only some of the most innovative and exciting work that I see teachers doing anywhere, but they are so committed. I mean, I meet with teachers after school, evenings. They are giving up every ounce of themselves. And I've always said, and I don't think I've ever said this on my podcast or any other podcast, so I'm saying it for the first time here on the Business of Education podcast. But if I were staffing a school from scratch, if I saw you taught in New York City on your resume, in my mind, that would actually give you a bump up. If you could teach there, you could teach anywhere. I feel like someone said that.
I feel like that's probably pretty correct. And what I meant by it's not the teachers. The teachers are there. They're dedicated. They're putting in the hard work. Like you said, we meet our superintendents usually in the evenings when they have spare time, or our principals, you know, they're willing to give up their personal time so often to try and advance the students in them. It's just how big New York City is. It moves very slow, you know, and then they make changes. They'll give you a change that they most recently did, and you might be going through this as well or have gone through it, but they went from Clever SSO to IBM, you know, right. unless you were one of their like must-have clients, you know what I mean? Their curriculum providers or something like that. That turnaround time was like 6 months. You know?
And that's something we've struggled with, you know, as a client of New York City is, you know, getting started in New York City is probably the hardest thing I have done. Like meaning coming in as Adobe and trying to kind of build from the ground up. And, you know, one to your earlier point about the literacy piece and getting students excited about it. One thing I have found, and it kind of aligns with what I'm talking about now about getting started, is AI has been a really big opportunity, because the truth is, if students don't have the critical thinking and the reading and writing skills to be able to develop effective prompts, they're not going to be able. So this whole idea of students being able to just like cheat using AI, the truth is if they don't have the actual skills they need to be able to develop prompts, they're not going to be able to use it. But that has been an example of a technology that has come on the scene and has really sparked student imagination and allowed them to create, beginning with a very low skill set. You know what I mean? Right. Like, so in other words, they can create very high level creative work product, not necessarily having the skills you would have needed to create that type of work product in years prior. So I think particularly in classrooms and environments where you have students that are coming in and do have the challenge of, you know, learning a new language, you know, some of the other issues that we know the students have, particularly in big cities, I think that's been in some ways an equalizer and something that's getting kids really excited about learning and technology.
No, I agree with that. And the thing that, you know, that I love about about AI, and obviously I'm passionate about Ed Soma, but the thing that I love about it is it's easier to make more individualized learning paths with AI today. And I think that I was just on with another guest earlier today, and we were talking about, she was showing me a book, The Outsiders. It was the first and probably the only book I ever read as a kid, just because I could identify with the socioeconomic of the book at that age. But content in schools isn't for everybody, you know what I mean? So giving AI is helping bridge that gap for sourcing content and putting it together to, you know, bring that engagement back to students that might not be interested in the topic, but are actively wanting to learn, right? So the engagement, I think we're going to see a dramatic increase with AI because of those individualized learning paths and the opportunities to do that.
The barrier to adoption, I mean, you know, take New York City, for instance, right? At first they banned ChatGPT, then they opened it up. The barrier to adoption isn't going to be students' willingness to use a tool like that. It's going to be teachers' comfort level with adopting a technology like that, because one of the things we see time and time again is that if a teacher doesn't feel comfortable, like that they can provide support to students on use of the tool, like they feel like they're a master of the tool in a sense, they're not going to want to adopt it into instruction in a meaningful way. And so that's been kind of my job, has been, how do I get teachers to recognize how easy it is to provide students with access to creative tools to be able to do that, so that it's no longer the barrier to adoption, right? And it's true of most tools, right? When you look at things that where we're struggling for adoption, yes, there's the typical things we run into, like contracts and getting in. But once you're in, how do you get people using? And the way
Right.
you get people using is by reducing those barriers to adoption.
I use a line quite often around our product. People that can't, don't. People that can't read, don't teach reading.
Right.
And that's where the gap that we fill is that we can help people that can't do.
That's awesome.
When the reason why I created EdSoma was because COVID happened and I didn't want my kids to fall behind in reading. And I was looking for a tool that would help me teach my kids how to read. That was like the fundamental thing. I want to be the one to teach my kids how to read, and I can't read. So give me a tool to do that.
Yeah.
But that tool didn't exist. So I built the tool in that scenario. I can't, but I want to do. And I felt like if we could, if a child could see the inspiration of a parent that couldn't, that inspiration would fall onto the child so they can. And passing that through a hard topic like reading, I thought would really be something that would resonate and be able to grow and scale, because reading is something that you have to have. Like it just, you know what I mean? Like there's no way around it. We might have the power of everything in our hand on our cell phone, but if you want to get into coding, you need to be able to read. If you want to be able to put inputs into ChatGPT, you have to be able to read. There's 100 things that in this world we're going to phase out during my lifetime, but I just don't believe reading's one. Unless Elon gets really good at these chips, we're not going to phase out reading.
It's funny. I won't name the speaker, but if you know the EdTech circuit, you'll know. I'll just say his nickname is the Ponytail, and so a lot of people who are listening might know who it is. But I happened to be at an event where this person was doing a keynote for an entire district, and I was standing in the back with the technology director, and he held up his cell phone and he said, "If all you have to offer my child is stuff that they could look up on this, you're not, we don't need you." Right. And I remember there was a gasp and people, and I remember thinking, wow, it's crazy that he said that, but he's not wrong. Right. Like, so teachers for years were masters of the subject area content. Like that's what we need. We needed people to come and kind of sage on a stage, tell us content and teach us the facts. And then we can go memorize the facts and come back and regurgitate the facts. The truth is, we talked for years about this shift in education from teaching to like facilitating learning. And I think we're starting to see that shift happening. And Adobe does a ton of research around creativity and learning. And they have this amazing statistic that showed that when one of the recent studies we did that showed that teachers who leverage creative work in their class not only see better outcomes from a learning perspective, but they also feel better well-being among themselves and their students, and they feel less stress and less burnout. Because again, think about when you're doing something creative, right? You're working, it's not all on the teacher in that moment to be, right? The teacher gets the time for those one-on-one conversations to really go and it's less, it provides less of a burnout opportunity for teachers. So when you talk about reading as this is a fundamental skill, right? Reading, writing, critical thinking, math, these are all fundamental basic skills.
They're not going anywhere.
No, they need to, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic, right? The 3 R's. They're not going anywhere. We need our students to be able to do all those things. But then how do we get our students to be thinkers? How do we get them to be creative? That's the other piece, right? So history isn't about teaching them the facts about history. It's about teaching them the context and the thinking around what have we learned from these things, right? So that's the piece where there is kind of this shift that we're making. And I think as like the last generation of teachers are starting to retire and new teachers are coming in, I, at least as someone who does a ton of professional development, I have started to see a shift, right? Teachers are more comfortable with some of that newer thinking around what the classroom looks like. And by the way, I don't fault teachers for this because, quite frankly, when I went to teacher prep school, that's how they prepped me to teach. They prepped me to do sage on a stage teaching, where I basically did like, do now, give problems, go over problems, teach new concept, give more problems, assign homework, grade that. Like, it was a very traditional structure, and that was the way we were taught to teach. And we're learning now that that's not really the way that students best learn.
Yeah, and I think, COVID helped definitely, if we look at, there's a lot of bad things we can talk about COVID, but there is some good. It did allow adoption to take place, I think, faster for technology in school. Now, teaching the bottleneck, in my opinion, is teaching teachers how to utilize the technology to prevent opportunities for burnout.
You nailed it.
And one of the things that, not to continually drop hints on our product, but one of the things that we like to do is give teachers a platform to the information that they typically had to go collect all the time. They used to spend all this time collecting information and then a little bit of time implementing that information, right? And what we want to do, and I think what technology will help them do, is it'll collect the information for them so they can focus on the things we can't do. You know what I mean? And give them the opportunities to just focus on teaching those things and not have to like do the grading and collection of information. And that's the thing that excites me about technology.
It's funny you say that, right? So I will say formative assessment is my jam. I love talking different formative assessment strategies and ways for teachers to collect data and analyze without having to do like kind of the, I always tell this story about when I first started teaching in New York City. I taught in one of those science classrooms with the big desk up at the front and like the sink that had the weird spigot that I didn't try to turn it on all year
with the pig in the back shelf.
Yeah, I thought it might blow up the school if I turned it on. And I remember I had a mentor teacher when I first started, and she used to say, at the end of every class, you want to give out index cards and put like 3 problems on the board and have them do the 3 problems on the index card and then collect them. And then you have data to help let you know whether the students understood the lesson. And what I learned was that those science desks could hold lots of stacks of index cards, because I would do it every day and I just didn't have the time or the bandwidth to go through that information, even though I knew the data was super valuable. But like you're saying, that's the key, is how do we unlock that piece? And one of the things that I do in my role as an education evangelist, which I know, weird title, but at Adobe, is I work with teachers on implementing what we call creative process in their classrooms, right? And one of the things I try to do when I'm doing that is I actually step aside and let the process unfold. And then at the end, I always say, okay, do you feel your work product was better as a result of the process than it would have been if I had just given you 20 minutes to work on a project the way we typically would have done in the classroom? And almost all of them say it was better as a result of the process. And I'm like, cool. How many of you got feedback from me during the process? And I intentionally stay at the front of the room and do not give feedback to anybody, because I want to make this point at the end, which is, notice how all of you felt you got valuable formative assessment through a creative activity from your peers. I did nothing, because the truth is, unless you get students to be able to use critical thinking skills to evaluate work and give peers, right? Think about teachers have like 150 kids. If you're at a high school level, you're seeing 150 kids. How do you give meaningful feedback to all those kids to allow them to kind of grow? And the truth is, you need partners in that process, and you can make students partners in that assessment process. Particularly like, when you talk about, I know your focus is on like reading and getting kids to think about reading. Well, think of AI I like to think of AI as a feedback tool as well, because think about a student who writes a story, right? And they go like, it was a dark and stormy night. Well, what if you put that into, like Adobe Express, and you start to see what that image generates, and you're like, oh, this is what how a reader might interpret it. It needs more descriptive words in it. Now I'm going to go back and actually expand on my writing, and I could actually use that as a way to test out, are the sentences is the story that I'm generating actually producing an image in my readers' heads of what might be what I want them to read, right? So it's like there are all these different ways now of giving students feedback without it having to be the teacher doing it.
Right. No, I love that. We touched on adoption briefly, but a lot of my viewers are EdTech founders and entrepreneurs. That's where I feel like we can bring the most value. But the biggest question is customer adoption, early buy-in. You know what I mean? That's the biggest challenge. If you were to drop or sprinkle a little bit of secret on there, what's some advice you'd give on getting teachers to buy in to a new product, especially in the tech space?
I mean, one thing teachers always want to see is real use cases. One thing that I see a lot of companies doing when I go to big conferences and things like that is they're focused on the product. And at the end of the day, teachers don't care about the product. Tools are tools. And I say that as someone who works for a tools company, right? Like I work for Adobe now. what they want is actual practical application of how it will improve teaching and learning outcomes, right, in the education space. Like, show them that. And I used to be a big advocate, and I've loved Google tools forever, like, all the G Suite stuff. And I used to present a ton on things like Google Forms and Google Sheets. And what I realized when I was doing all that presenting work was I was showing like quick hacks and quick productivity workflow, like, tricks, but I wasn't actually deepening the teaching and learning experience to the point where teachers would be like, that's actually going to change how my kids learn. That could actually like move the needle on what we do. And I think that's the thing, that when you're thinking about your product and what you're showing to teachers, the bells and whistles are nice, but at the end of the day, you need practical, like, here's an example of how an 8th grade teacher, Sally, is using this in her class, and here's some of the work product the students developed as a result. And when you can frame it in the way of, in terms of like a lesson or something that actually can make a teacher go, wow, I do that, and this is much better than what I would get. I think productivity takes us so far. I think actually impacting those teaching and learning outcomes is what makes a big difference. So I think that's more of a tip in terms of marketing the product. I think the other thing that came to my mind when you said that, and I kind of laughed, was, timing is everything, man. Like,
it is. When
I founded Ready Learner One, the first tech adoption we were really looking at was AR VR. And, one of the things I think we quickly saw was we were like, AR will make it, everyone, right? Ready Player One has got people in love with this idea of VR, virtual spaces. And there are some amazing tools out there that do a really great job of that. But when we start to think of actual practical adoption in schools, I think we quickly saw AR as something teachers can pick up and use right away, because students have at least their phone or a device in their hands. But like, there were people that came up to me right as the pandemic was starting, and they're like, wow, you co-founded a VR company right when the pandemic started. That must be a gold mine. And I was like, nobody's ready for it. Like,
no one's ready for it.
No one's ready for it. The timing is off. We're off. So eSports was something I think we caught the wave of at the right time. We wrote the eSports education playbook during the pandemic, and as it turned out, eSports were like the only sport that was continuing kind of uninterrupted during the pandemic and was starting to grow, and as a market has just gotten huge. And so that's been a space that's always excited me, because that idea of tying gaming in with kids learning and getting schools to buy in there is such a great idea. But those were the two things. I was thinking of the marketing edge, and then, everyone has to keep in mind, you might have the best idea in the world, but if you are off on the timing, it does not matter.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. When I talk with investors, the first thing I bring up is timing is everything. And right now we are in like the best time sequence for literacy right now. It's been brought on the forefront. We came out of COVID, and we had these issues prior to COVID, but they started identifying them, right? And
there'll
now
always be a need for literacy, right? We talked about that as a fundamental skill, but you're right. There's a gap since COVID, and there's been this struggle for students to catch up. So there's not only the evergreen need for reading and writing and literacy skills, but there happens to be a particular like need for remediation right now in that space. But
Ready Learner One.
Yeah.
I love the name. I would buy it just by the name, but what is it?
It's funny. So it's funny that you say that, because the first book we published, the AR VR book, is called Reality Bites. Originally, the name of the book was Ready Learner One, but we loved the name so much, we were like, you know what, we're going to make that the company name, and we'll find another name for the book. So that was the company I started to, as I said before, try to improve adoption timelines for schools. So the idea was that, we had a partnership with Dave Burgess Consulting where we would publish books under a Ready Learner One imprint around this idea of technology adoption, and kind of how we get teachers excited about leveraging technology for their students, like showing not only the benefits, but giving them some hands-on use of it. So like Reality Bites was an AR enabled book. If you took your phone and scanned the QR code in the back cover and then put your phone on our cover, me and my co-authors popped out of the cover and talked about what the book was about. And if you skipped through and looked at chapters, like there were actually interactive pieces that would come up. So the idea was to give teachers an actual hands-on experience with AR and VR and aligning it to a learning framework that we had developed. So in addition to publishing, we were partnering with school districts on some of that adoption. But as I mentioned before, we started up right during the pandemic, and of course, everyone then fell into like remediation mode, right? Like, how do we support schools? And so a lot of our work became supporting schools during the pandemic. So that, we started out on the AR VR kind of space, both in corporate and in education. We started in education and then branched out into corporate, and then took on eSports next,
Gotcha.
which was really exciting. And we were kind of in that when I jumped to work at Adobe, because, life takes you a direction sometimes you don't expect. And when my dream job presented itself, I was like, okay, it was too hard of an opportunity to pass up. And, this, I don't think I've shared this on a podcast either, but kind of the person who hired me, when we were talking, he was like, well, what's your goal with Ready Learner One? And I was like, my goal is to impact, like, to 10x the number of educators that I can reach and kind of grow. And as a result, students are really going to be using technology. He was like, but I can give you that now. He's like, if you come here, I can put you in front of all of these teachers in schools that you'll be able to help and impact. And I was like, wow, while there is, and Kyle, you mentioned it before, there's this thing about working for yourself and working for your own company where you're like, it's incredibly empowering, and there really isn't anything like it. And it's not for everyone. It's scary, right? But at the same time, when you're successful, it's a grind. But when you do well, right, it's this high that you can't really reach anywhere else. But the truth is, I'm working on my doctoral degree. I was doing all these other things too, and I was like, wow, I can do the thing I want to do now. And so it was the kind of thing where I can, and Ready Learner One still exists, and we still have clients and we still do work. But the truth is, a lot of my focus right now is really on Adobe and pushing this idea of empowering students through creativity at every classroom and every grade level. And I think for me, it feels very mission based. So I work for a company, but I do wake up every day feeling like I'm driven by a mission, and that's exciting.
I love that. And the thing that, my mind's going a million miles an hour, and I will have a conversation
That's
offline
great.
for some of the details. But one, when you get into education, your perception of life changes. And I've been successful in other areas of my life. I've been blessed that way. But I've worked harder over the last 4 years than I ever have my entire life for less. And I've never, for longer than a day. Some days I'm like, why am I doing this? For a day. But the reminder of impacting somebody else's life to the embetterment is so refreshing, and it's so recycling to feel that refreshment that you can just step back into that moment of why you're doing this, and then you are rejuvenated so fast.
Yesterday, I got to see some student work, some student projects that were created using our tool, Adobe Express, which is the tool I evangelize at Adobe. And I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, wow, if I never worked with this teacher and shown her this student is now creating videos, creating movies, and like has this whole plan for what they're going to do next. And I'm like, I will never meet this student. The student will never know my name. But I kind of started that rock going down the hill, right? And it's like, and I know that it's not just that student. It's every teacher I work with that goes back to their classroom and is working and is providing these creative opportunities to their students, knowing that that's happening. Like, I don't need the thank you. The thank you is like you said, it's the feeling I feel knowing that this is happening and knowing that school is a better place for students now because of the work that I'm doing. And that's the kind of extra bonus you get, right, on top of that's the driving force, so to speak.
That registers with me, or resonates with me so deeply. Just I don't know. There's just something about it, and I dropped out of school at grade 9. Like, that's how committed I was to not go back to school. Like,
and by the way, that was the thing that got me excited about esports, to be honest. When I started really digging into what esports was all about, what I was noticing was that schools that implemented esports programs were getting kids who would normally drop out of school to stay in school. They were using esports as an incentive. These kids love to play video games. Awesome. You could do it for school, but we just need you to go to classes and do those other things too. And they were willing to do it. And I'm like, that's the thing, is how do we find ways to get kids excited about being in school, right? Because at the end of the day, you're right. We need these kids to leave with all of those fundamental skills. And, not every student is going to, be like you and find their way into something that is, really empowering and driving them to be successful. So it's like,
right.
how do we meet kids where they are while still getting them to do the things we need them to do in order to have those life skills they're going to need later?
No, that makes so much sense. And I see that with my kid, my oldest son. He's a game junkie. He loves it. He's a Fortnite fan. And I've learned so much from watching how these kids engage in video games to try and implement it into real life skills. We were brought up in a different era, so it was more like, hey, here, this is what you're going to do. There wasn't so many options. But like, sports was always a big part of my childhood. And I look at my son and I'm like, I wish I had half the talent you have when it comes to football. He plays flag football. He's a wide receiver and can run faster than everybody, can jump, catch the ball, amazing talent. You're like, why don't you go in the backyard and play football, or go watch a football game on TV? Just go watch the football game. And, he'd rather play video games or, rather create something of nature. So I came up with this concept. Sports cards are getting huge again. And it's not my concept from the sports card. Things are streaming, pack ripping. But I'm like, why don't we start opening packs online and you can be a video creator?
I watched a lot of those, by the way. I watched I don't know why I watch these videos. It's like Wax something. I forgot what his name is, but there's this dude who opens 80s Topps baseball cards, and I watch it all the time because they were the same sets that I created. You're right. There's a total market for people. I'm the person watching these videos.
Yeah. So I found myself watching him. I've got a huge sports card collection. He collects Pokemon cards, but I'm like, why don't you do this? We'll rip these cards. You can learn how to build a business with this. You can sell the cards, build the cards. But what we're going to do is rip football on Sundays during the football game. And your topic of engagement is football while ripping the football game. So now,
I love that.
Now he's like found a love to like watch the football game, learn their players, because he ties it to this creative process in selling the cards online. And now he's, I'm getting the effect that I wanted to, but I had to meet him where he was.
So it's funny because now we're getting into like the whole, this whole being an educator, being a parent thing is interesting too. So I have a college sophomore, a high school sophomore, and a third grader. So I'm like all over the.
I've got 11, 10, 6, and 2. So
yeah, so it's
I've
like
got the spread.
Right. But what I've tried to do for each child, and I'm still trying to figure this out for the third one, but like find that thing. What is that thing that gets them excited? For my oldest, who's in college now, it was food. Mm-hmm. When she was in 4th grade, she started a food blog, and she kept that food blog going till she was in 12th grade. And I'm not going to go through the whole story now, but I'll just tell you, she was on the radio, she was featured in the local newspaper, and all of that became something like she was able to funnel her passion into this creative endeavor that when she then went and applied to colleges, she had this as like her like body of work, so to speak, right? It was the stuff that she did outside of school to show, this is what I did. I created. I used my time to do something, to make something. And like, I had her make, she made the Adobe Express portfolio page kind of telling, that was like her college essay. Mm-hmm. And I always joke, I'm like, she got into a really good school. And I'm like, I'm not saying it's because of that. I'm just saying we can make it a correlation, right? Right. So I think it's really important. Like if you're a parent or you're an educator and you're listening to this, it's really like, if your child has a passion, try to drive them into like a creative space, do something with it, make something tangible out of it, right? Because that will matter down the road. right? And especially like you think about employers now in the shifting landscape of the workplace, they're looking for that. They're looking for people who have the drive to put something into action, right?
The thing that I look for most in my company is somebody that's willing to step outside of my box and be creative in a way that brings value to their self, but also to the business. And the creative component of it is like the number one thing that I look for. Like, here's the task. How can you do it differently than everybody else? And I would love to see that.
I just did a talk yesterday for like 50 educators in New York City, actually. And I was sharing some statistics with them, and around, well, here are some interesting facts. One, Papermate Sharpie did a study this year that showed that this generation wants to be 30% of, I think, 2,000 people they surveyed. Those students want to be remembered more for their creativity than for like their wealth, their like social media fame, all that. Like that is the thing they want to be remembered for, is their creativity. I was surprised by that. But then when you start to look at some of the statistics that LinkedIn has been releasing, you know, they're saying the search for creative skills has grown 2 to 3-fold over the past few years. And consistently, people who list creative skills in their LinkedIn portfolio page often get, I think it was like 18% higher starting salary. So like these things matter at the end of the day, right? So it's not a fad. It's actually something that we're seeing the shift to as we start to see all this AI adoption and things like that. What is the differentiator between that? I mean, my daughter in college was talking about minors that she was going to potentially look at. And one of the minors she talked about, I was like, is that something that AI can do? Because if it's something AI can do, you want a soft skill. You want something that is something that allows you to not only leverage the technology, but add something on top of that. So,
right.
Yeah.
AI is a touchy subject. You said earlier that New York was going to ban ChatGPT, and then they decided to go a different direction.
Did it for, they did briefly, and then I think, and then brought it in, at least for teachers.
But what are some of the things that you could say if a teacher was watching this? What's something that you would want to say to them to lower the idea of that it could replace them, or that they shouldn't, you know, be adopting it or accepting it? What's some advice you'd give a teacher on the opportunities that AI are presenting today?
You know, the approach I've taken with AI in terms of talking to teachers about it is I've really said, look, Pandora's box is open. It's not like this isn't even if a district bans it, students are still going to have access to it through their personal devices. There's no stopping at this point. So the question is, how do we best leverage the technology to improve what's happening in the classroom? And I think that's what we've been looking to do, is what are those use cases that really not just get kids excited, but get teachers excited, help them to be the best version of themselves. You know, the easiest way to get buy-in, and you talked a little bit about it before in terms of like using like a chat bot like ChatGPT to kind of generate content or whatever, like differentiate. There's the differentiation piece, but honestly, there's the productivity piece of it. So think about all the garbage the teachers have to do, like all the emails they have to write and reports they have to write and things like that. That's what a chatbot will do for you, right? That's the thing you could train a chatbot to do, is take care of all that stuff. So right away, you're saving like an hour or two just from a productivity standpoint. But then there's that creative piece. And that's the piece that I think really kind of gets people inspired, right? I talked before about using a prompt to create an image based on that. That's really where we've seen teachers getting excited, is the ability to turn words into image, to turn words into video, to create meaningful content as a result. And that's where kids start to get excited. And so we talk about how do we find a safe space for them to do it, and how do we do it through a tool that is easy enough for teachers to use with their students, but not feel like they have to be the like we talked before about being the expert, right? Because they don't want to do that. And that's why I think we've had so much success with Adobe Express, which is kind of like our entry point tool to creativity. I mean, if you're listening to this and you've heard of Adobe, chances are one of the two things you're thinking of is like PDFs or Photoshop. And yes, we do both of those things. We do many, and other
they do
things,
them well,
right? We do many things. But like if you've ever used Photoshop or if you used Premiere, like those are like complex tools. You wouldn't necessarily be like, hey, kindergarten student, come here and use Photoshop, right? Like so Express has been our way to like actually get younger kids creating. Like there's a workflow I love to show where I draw a cat, like a stick figure cat, and then I take a picture of that cat and use it to create an entire image out of that, like using my basic drawing as the base image. So now we're saying kindergarten students can take their drawings and turn that drawing into the thing they see in their head. But going back to what you were saying before, Kyle, they have to have the reading and writing and critical thinking skills to be able to do that. And that's where the work you're doing becomes so important, because we need students to have those literacy skills. We need them to have those, those thinking skills, those analytical skills. And that's the thing that as teachers, that's really the shift, right? I talked before about that shift from teacher to facilitator. That's what we need to see happen, is teachers to be more comfortable saying, I need to get you the skills, not the facts. And so here's how we're going to do that.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jesse. We could talk for another 10 hours and I wouldn't run out of questions, but I do have to be mindful of everybody's time on the show, but I do end the podcast with the same question every time.
Sure.
I do this podcast because I am thirsty to learn in areas that can help better my business, but better the people around me. And I was fortunate enough. Shaquille O'Neal came in and invested in our company and gave us a leg up. You know what I mean? It brought us on the stages of TechCrunch 3 weeks after we launched a product. These were huge opportunities, but it was because of my network that allowed me to do that. Now I'm trying to give that back by access to the people that I get access to through EdSoma. What's a way that you would recommend young kids to leverage their network, build their network, and how to really take advantage of that opportunity today?
So first, before I get into that, I will say Shaquille O'Neal, free throw shooting aside, one of the pound for pound best centers of all time. Grew up with him. Love that guy. For students, and this is something I'm kind of going through with my daughter now, with she's in college, and I'm like, you need to have a LinkedIn. You need to start to you meet someone at a conference, you get on your phone and connect with them. So I guess my message to students would be, your network is your value. So jobs change, life changes, but ultimately at the end of the day, building a network is incredibly important, and it's never too early to start doing that. So how do you start doing that? If you are interested in something, let's say you are, even if you're interested in comic books or whatever, or baseball cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not too early to just reach out to someone at Topps, reach out at someone at Marvel, and just ask questions, be inquisitive, start to make connections. That stuff matters. And I can't tell you how many times in my life something appeared at my job at Adobe. My job at Adobe happened because of my network. I happened to be at dinner with someone at the right place in the right time. But had I not had that person as part of my, big network of people, it never would have happened. And so I think for students, they think there's I have to wait till I'm older to start doing that. And I'm telling you, the earlier you do it, people will notice. Mm-hmm. I notice when kids in college are reaching out to me and asking questions, and I'll connect with them and we'll keep in touch. And then you never know when the right thing comes up where I'll be like, oh, you know who might be cool for that? That person that I've been talking to just every so often, who seems really engaged and passionate. And those are the things that will make you stand out. So I would say the easiest way to do it, pick that thing that you love, whether it's games, whether it's comic books, whether it's Pokemon cards, whatever it is. Start to reach out to people, start to ask questions, emails, get a LinkedIn, start to make connections, start to build that. And I think you will see it will make such a difference.
What a lot of people don't realize is that people do really ultimately want to help somebody else. I think that is, we just went through an election. The world seems divided, but if you put them all in the same room and ask them if they would help somebody else, every single one of them would do it without even thinking about it. That's one thing that I think people align on as a whole, is they want to help everybody around them. That's just the way we're built. And I get, because of my luck with networking and the access to the people that I have, I feel obligated because I've been so blessed because of it.
And Kyle, I don't know if you can tell, I love talking. So it's so I love talking about anything and everything. So I've had people hit me up and they're like, I wind up informally mentoring just because I love talking, I love sharing, I love helping. And I think that's true. If you're in the education space, you want to help. Like, it's literally the point of being in this space. You want to help people, you want to support people. And so I definitely think, hey, if you're a student and you're happy to be listening to this, reach out to me. Like, start with Kyle and I. It's a starting point. And over time, it will exponentially grow your network, and that will help you at times when you don't even realize you need the help.
I appreciate that. And, to end it, if somebody did want to reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Oh, sure. So I'm on all the socials at Lubinsky, JLUBINSKY. My website's jesselubinsky.com. I also have a podcast. It's called the Partial Credit Podcast that I host with two other educators. It's kind of a mix of education, pop culture, and shenanigans. That's partial.credit. And all my contact info you can find on those sites, or hit me up on LinkedIn. Again, Jesse Lubinsky everywhere.
And to make it easy, we'll make sure that all that information's in the
beautiful. We love that
on the podcast.
Look at what a professional operation we have going out here.
We love to do it. I just love connecting people that can bring value and create bigger things to me, because I've learned that life is bigger than what I can offer it, and it can get bigger the more people I bring into it. So, Jesse, thank you for coming on the show.
No, thank you. This was great.
Blessed.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Talk soon.